Sanibonani Jambo Masquera say Makadi, welcome to Africa Focus, taking Africa to the world. It's such a pleasure to be in your company on this Saturday, as hoping you've had a fantastic week. Audrey Shimanda Twala will take a look at all the topical stories from the continent today as we seek to continue educating you about what's happening in Africa. And our top stories now: African nations came out swinging at the United Nations annual gathering last week. The world leaders are calling for a dramatic fiscal measure to help economies survive the coronavirus pandemic, and to also have veto power in the Security Council. Let's take a listen into what happened.
Given the current state of urgency, as our countries need financial support that is on the same level as the economic crisis that they are experiencing. A simple moratorium, a debt moratorium, is not sufficient. Given the challenges before us, we need to purely and simply cancel this debt and think up and implement a new paradigm to meet the development needs of the poorest countries.
We call for 2 permanent seats with veto power and 5 non-permanent seats for Africa. We need a UN that fully meets Africa's needs in peace processes, which can only be achieved if Africa is involved in making such decisions. In view of the incessant conflicts that are currently tearing down the African continent and retarding its progress, the reforms are long overdue.
J'appelle l'ensemble des partenaires du continent à prendre...
I call on all Africa's partners to take bolder measures to relieve our economies, which have been severely affected by the effects of COVID-19. The financial needs of Africa have been assessed at 100 billion US annually over a 3-year period, or a total of $300 billion US.
En sa qualité de membre du Comité des 10 de l'Union africaine.
As a member of the Committee of 10 of the African Union on reform of the United Nations Security Council, my country solemnly reaffirms the urgency of making it a reality, making a reality Africa's representation in this organ of the United Nations. In so doing, we will further strengthen the values of peace, of solidarity, equity, and progress embodied by the United Nations.
Still with the United Nations General Assembly, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa called for the lifting of sanctions against Zimbabwe and Sudan in a speech. Here's what he had to say.
It is in the spirit of this new global deal that we call on the international community and our international partners to support the rollout of a comprehensive stimulus package for African countries. This will enable African countries to not only mitigate the health impacts of COVID-19, but to aid us in the immense task of rebuilding our shattered economies. To ensure that no country is left behind, we reiterate our position as the African Union that economic sanctions against Zimbabwe and Sudan should be lifted to allow their governments to...
And developments coming in from Mali now. A new president has been sworn into office. This is 5 weeks after the overthrow of Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Former Defense Minister Bando, who's 70 years old, was picked by the coup leader Colonel Assimi Goïta to head a transitional government until elections, which are expected in 18 months' time. Colonel Goïta will be his vice president in the interim. The appointment of a civilian president was a condition by the West African regional group ECOWAS to then lift the sanctions that it has imposed on the country. Stocks of goods at the moment are running low in the capital Bamako, where businesses are hoping for an announcement from ECOWAS after the inauguration to see if they will lift the sanctions thereafter. One thing that is unclear is how far Bando will be able to call the shots after he's sworn in. This is because he was chosen, because he's well respected both in the military and in the general public. He also said to get on well with Colonel Assimi Goïta, and portraying a unified front will be central to the success of the tenure of Ndao and his vice president. Any perception that the interim president is not really in charge could lead to renewed sanctions and international pressure on the junta. West African heads of states are also afraid that the coup in Mali may lead to other uprisings within the region that is facing several elections in the coming months. Alexander Lukashenko was sworn in as well as for a sixth term as president of Belarus. The ceremony would have normally been publicized as a major state occasion, but was instead held without any warning. Here's a report.
Alexander Lukashenko was abruptly sworn in for a new 5-year term as president of Belarus on Wednesday in an inauguration that came with no warning. The opposition, which has staged mass protests since his disputed election in early August, immediately decried the inauguration as illegitimate and called for its followers to return to the streets. It accuses Lukashenko of rigging the vote. Lukashenko has been in power for 26 years, and his inauguration would usually be publicised as a major state occasion. Just a few hundred people were there. One opposition politician, Pavel Latushko, likened it to a secret meeting of thieves. Where are the jubilant citizens and the diplomatic corps? He asked on social media, calling Lukashenko president only of the riot police and a handful of lying officials. He called for civil disobedience. Lukashenko has so far withstood the protests with backing from his ally, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and through a harsh security crackdown. Belarus has just 9.5 million people, but it matters to Russia as a buffer against NATO and conduit for oil and gas exports. The United States and European Union are drawing up sanctions against officials involved in the election and subsequent clampdowns.
That was a slight diversion from our African stories. Coming back onto the continent now, Mozambique has formally asked the European Union to support them in the battle against the Islamist militants in its gas-rich northern province of Cabo Delgado. It has requested support in logistics and specialized training for its soldiers. The Southern African nation has been fighting the insurgents for 3 years now with very little success. At least 1,000 people have been killed and an estimated 250,000 people have fled their homes. The government has lost control of 3 coastal cities. The Foreign Affairs Minister Veronica Makamo has written to Brussels requesting for support after the EU expressed its willingness to assist. In the letter, Makamo also asked for assistance in development programs as a way of reducing the vulnerability of the locals, that are mainly young people, to the allure of joining the insurgents. Well, a panel of experts gathered by the World Health Organization has listed a number of factors that may be pushing the spread of the coronavirus down in Africa. Expertise in epidemic control, a young population, and a possible effect of pre-existing immunity were cited as possible factors. The panel of experts that included the WHO's Regional Director for Africa, that's Dr. Matshidiso Moeti, offered several explanations to the different behavior of the pandemic and the continent when compared to the rest of the world. The swift application of lockdowns that we saw happening across the continent came at a high cost for many economies. As it was mentioned, the structure of the African society of caring for the elderly at home instead of the European way of caring for the elderly in old people's homes was cited as an advantage for Africans. But also new explanations emerged in the conference, such as the possible impact of smaller urban areas in many African countries, which means that the virus could then travel less fast in more remote populations in the rural areas. The continent's transport system was also mentioned, as cities and regions are not as interconnected as in other parts of the world. Dr. Moeti says that previous experiences in handling pandemics, such as Ebola, have also proven crucial. when dealing with this pandemic. But she also warned that more research needs to be done to try and establish the true extent of COVID-19 on the continent. More than 1.4 people have been confirmed to have the virus, and this is across the continent with over 34,000 deaths. About 1 million people have already recovered. Now we'll take a look at Africa Wrap, bits and pieces of topical stories from across the continent coming in a few minutes. Ramifications of Mali's coup. We'll take a look at how this has taken a ripple throughout the region, and also we'll take a look at Timbuktu, which has been hit especially hard by sanctions imposed by the economic community of West African states. And meanwhile, as South Africa is preparing to open its borders as the coronavirus restrictions ease, and also we'll go to Sudan, which is reeling following its worst flooding on record. Here's a report from Africa.
Mali may be finding its feet in the wake of the mid-August coup d'etat, but in Timbuktu, in the north of the country, it's business as usual for the Malian army. Here, in the conflict-ridden northern and central regions of the country, security is still the primary concern. But residents are also now struggling against sanctions and border closures imposed by the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, hampering an economy that relies on trade with neighbouring countries.
It creates a lot of problems for us, because everything comes from outside. We don't have a factory here, we don't have anything, so when the borders close, it's a big problem for us. Even the 2 days of the coup were really hard.
Since first breaking out in the north in 2012, Mali has struggled to contain a brutal Islamic insurgency, which has since spread to the centre of the country as well as Burkina Faso and Niger. Thousands of civilians and soldiers have died in the conflict, which has severely impacted the economy of this already impoverished West African state. The recent political upheaval has shown few signs of changing the situation on the ground here. 20 Malian soldiers have been killed since the coup. The junta has vowed to hold fresh elections and has appointed officials to lead the fragile country through the transition.
Now it is time to progress quickly. That is why we have already started to set up the college that will quickly put in place the organs of the transition. No time was wasted. It was necessary to go through these steps. Now that these stages are complete, we will continue the rest, install the transitional bodies, and start working normally.
Ghana's president and the head of ECOWAS, Nana Akufo-Addo, underscored the need to establish a civilian government at the head of Mali after talks with the military junta in the Ghanaian capital, Accra.
There must be a government in place in Bamako that will be able to deal with the great challenges facing the Malian people and the Malian nation. As soon as it is possible, and that's settled, the situation will start to normalise.
To South Africa now, where President Cyril Ramaphosa said borders will reopen to most countries in October, allowing international travel once more as the country further eases its anti-coronavirus measures. However, people entering the country will only be able to arrive via 3 airports: Johannesburg, Durban and Cape Town.
On arrival, travelers will need to present a negative COVID-19 test results not older than 72 hours from the time of departure, from whence they will have come from.
South Africa has been hard hit by the pandemic relative to many other African countries. With almost 16,000 deaths and 650,000 infections recorded to date, it accounts for around half of the total number of cases detected on the continent. Ramaphosa said the country had succeeded in overcoming the worst of its outbreak. He noted that the number of new cases had dropped from an average of 12,000 a day at the height of the storm in July to fewer than 2,000. Tempers have risen in Nigeria after a coronavirus budget crunch forced the oil-rich nation to dump its petrol subsidy system. The cost of fuel at the pump has risen by around 15%, hitting a record high of $1.55 per US gallon. Authorities announced an end to the subsidies earlier this year, as falling oil prices robbed Nigeria of a major chunk of its revenues. Making matters worse, the government has almost doubled the cost of electricity. For Nigerians, the impact of these changes are huge.
I don't think this is the right time, having the fact that we are still in lockdown. Families are trying to survive. Companies are reducing their staff. So I don't think this is the right time.
Ivorian former rebel leader and ex-Prime Minister Guillaume Soro is encouraging people to mobilise against President Alassane Ouattara's possible third term in office. Despite the Constitutional Council rejecting Soro's own presidential candidacy, he's declared his intention to run in the October 31st vote. He's also claimed that the poll is simply a scheme to enshrine the 78-year-old Ouattara as president.
The fight we are now going to wage must put an end to life presidencies and constitutional coups.
Violent protests against Ouattara's candidacy left around 15 people dead last month, and demonstrations broke out in several cities this week despite a ban on rallies. Tensions in the West African state, a major producer of coffee and cacao, have revived traumatic memories of a months-long civil war that erupted after the 2010 elections, claiming more than 3,000 lives. Sudanese authorities arrested 41 people for possessing a large amount of explosive material, including a compound similar to that which caused a catastrophic explosion in Beirut last month. Intelligence gathered since August on the movements of the terrorists group led to the arrests.
These dangerous materials are now kept in a safe place with the Rapid Support Forces. Forensic evidence analysis has been carried out and specific results have been reached, stating that these explosives are dangerous and could destroy the entire capital.
Meanwhile, Sudan is also battling to contain flooding across the country after the waters of the Nile reached record levels, destroying and damaging tens of thousands of homes. More than 100 people have been killed and 50 others injured. Heavy rain usually falls in Sudan from June to October, and the country faces severe flooding every year. But this year, officials said they had recorded the highest waters on the Blue Nile since records began over a century ago. And finally, the Senegalese former head of athletics world governing body, Lamine Diack, has been found.
Well, Mauritius will reopen its borders from the 1st of October under strict COVID-19 safety measures. And those that will be required those that will be arriving will be required to quarantine for at least 14 days at their own cost. It is estimated to be about $1,300 per person. Tourism experts have faulted the quarantine cost as being too high. Tourists can choose to either spend the fortnight in 3-star or 5-star hotels or to return to their countries. Quarantine costs for Mauritians returning for medical treatment abroad will be covered by the government. And an advisor from the government says that at the Prime Minister's office, airline bookings and hotel room reservations will only be made online. The government says priority will be given to the returning Mauritian nationals and licensed residents, those that are employed in Mauritius and in tourism. No local cases of COVID-19 have been detected for more than 150 days now, but a few imported cases have been registered. Mauritius has so far recorded 10 deaths from the coronavirus pandemic. The country heavily relies on the revenues from tourism, and its economy has been severely hit by the pandemic. Well, to wrap up this bulletin, South Africans were urged to embrace the culture of diversity as they celebrated Heritage Day on the 24th of September last week. While South Africans heeded the President's call, who asked them to all join hands and dance to a musical phenomenon.
Numerous families celebrated Heritage Day basking in the sun, enjoying fun and games at Nyala on 63.
Considering that we're coming out of a lockdown situation for the country, so we felt that we needed to give people the opportunity to come outdoors and really enjoy this setting where they can still interact with people. For the longest time, everyone has been closed up and indoors, so we thought this opportunity is for people to just get, fresh air.
Entertainment was the order of the day. After all, people spent almost 8 months of lockdown in-house. Heritage Day is known as Bride Day, and the celebration on 63 on Nyala had meat galore.
The meat that is being enjoyed here today, A-grade meat, if I have to say so myself, which is what we provide, was supplied by us as Zarite. And today being National Heritage Day and Pride Day, you can never have pride without meat.
Children and adults were exposed to arts, culture and businesses that survived the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, man, we're having a great time, and anybody else at home.
What could the day been without music? Georgie in the afternoon kept the music rolling.
I'm Georgie in the afternoon, and you're watching Galaxy Universal Network. Check it out.
A number of famous faces celebrated the day with 63 on Nyala.
Day at level 5 would have really been restricted, right? But thanks to the easing of restrictions, South Africans are able to celebrate Heritage Day through art, culture, as well as music and dance. For Galaxy Universal Network, I am Basitana Pura.
And that's a wrap for Africa Focus. Thank you for watching the program. Remember to stay tuned to Galaxy Universal Network as we take you to Ekasi. Township Rollers is up next.
Violence and sexual abuse against children has become a major social challenge during the COVID-19 lockdown. We appeal to adults, parents and caregivers to be kind to